how do we really make those big, tricky moral decisions in this complex world of ours? I mean, is it about following some kind of universal, rock-solid rules, or should our choices be guided more by our personal connections, by the actual people involved?
It's a fundamental question, isn't it? Really cuts to the core of ethics.
Absolutely. Welcome, everyone, to The Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into two, well, foundational, but often clashing ideas in philosophy: the ethics of justice and the ethics of care.
Big topics. And they have such a long history.
They really do. Our mission here is to unpack how these concepts have shaped, maybe even defined, our understanding of morality, especially when we look through the lens of feminist philosophy.
And then maybe see how they might, surprisingly, work together towards something more peaceful, equitable.
Exactly. We're hoping to explore if they can be reconciled. This deep dive draws from some really rich academic discussion, tracing philosophy from, Kant right up to contemporary feminist thought.
So a journey from those big universal principles to the power of connection.
Let's dive in. Okay, let's unpack this. Morality, ethics, they've been absolutely central to philosophy since, well, forever, right? Plato, Aristotle, they were laying down the groundwork.
It's fascinating how enduring those early thoughts were. They set up these frameworks that, honestly, for centuries were just the way to think about right and wrong.
They really shaped things, laws, social norms.
Absolutely. It wasn't just ivory tower stuff. It impacted how societies organized themselves around fairness.
So thinking about those traditional pillars, those big ideas that kind of set the stage, what are we talking about?
Well, you generally see three major schools pop up. First, there's Kant's deontology. Think duty-based ethics.
Duty-based, meaning?
Meaning morality isn't about the results, the consequences. It's about these absolute universal principles. Rules for everyone, everywhere, always, no exceptions.
Okay, do the right thing because it's the rule.
Exactly. Because it's your duty, not because it feels good or helps someone necessarily.
What else?
Then you've got Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism, almost the opposite approach, really.
How so?
Here, it's all about the consequences. Morality is whatever brings the greatest good, the most happiness for the greatest number of people.
Maximize happiness, minimize suffering overall.
Precisely. It's a calculation, in a way.
Okay, Kant's rules, Bentham's results.
Yeah.
What's the third?
Social contractualism.
Yeah.
Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, and then later John Rawls really developed it.
Ah, the social contract idea.
Right. The core idea is that morals and even legitimate government come from some kind of mutual agreement. We all sort of theoretically agree on the rules to live by.
For everyone's benefit, ideally.
That's the theory. And these models, they were all designed to be universal, impartial, applied to everyone equally.
Right.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting, isn't it? Feminist philosophers started asking this just critical question.
Yeah.
Universal for whom?
Yeah.
What was missing there?
That question, universal for whom, just blew the doors open. The critique was that these frameworks often separated rationality from emotion in a way that wasn't quite accurate.
How do you mean?
Well, reason got linked implicitly with men, and emotion, spirituality, care, those were often associated with women. And the argument was this division subtly kind of downgraded women's experiences and perspectives within these supposedly universal systems. It wasn't always overt, but it was sort of baked in.
So it wasn't just about who made the rules, but the very definition of rational or moral might have been gendered from the start.
Exactly. Take Rawls' famous veil of ignorance. Great thought experiment, right? Design rules without knowing who you'll be in society.
Yeah, to ensure fairness.
But even that got criticized. Feminist thinkers pointed out it often seemed to assume a male perspective when setting up the original position, maybe not fully considering women's specific experiences or concerns in that initial design. The neutrality itself was questioned.
Wow.
And it went deeper. French feminist psychoanalysts like Helena Sixus and Julia Kristeva talked about phallocentric systems.
Allocentric. Okay, break that down.
It sounds academic, I know. Basically male-centered. They argued that traditional language, thought, culture often revolves around male experience, the phallus being symbolic of male authority, not just literal.
Right.
And this structure subtly positions women as well as the other, as defined by what they lack compared to the male standard, rather than having their own positive definition.
Like a supporting character in someone else's story?
Kind of. Sixus even provocatively asked in Castration or Decapitation whether masculine language itself needed questioning to sort of reclaim a different way of being through writing.
So they were really challenging the foundations, language, symbolism, power. This wasn't just quiet theorizing, was it? When did this really start shaking things up more broadly?
That's a key point. It really gained traction in academia in the 1970s. Feminist philosophy started challenging these established norms head-on.
A real shift.
Oh, absolutely. If you connect it to the bigger picture, it was a major shift. Suddenly, these perspectives that had been, marginalized or just absent were entering the main philosophical conversation, questioning everything.
So as these critiques were bubbling up, how did ideas about the self start changing, moving away from that lone, rational individual?
Well, psychoanalytic ideas became really important for understanding the relational self. Nancy Chodorow, for instance. Her work suggested that because women were primarily responsible for mothering, they often develop a sense of self that's deeply interconnected, relational.
Defined by connections to others.
In large part, yes. Whereas men's sense of self, she argued, was often more about autonomy, separation, and this theory helped explain, or at least explore, why women were so often linked to those domestic caregiving roles.
Interesting. And other movements.
You also had lesbian feminism emerging strongly in the 70s, really advocating for women-centered spaces, for women speaking to women, free from male interference. A radical assertion of an independent female voice at the time.
Okay, so we have justice traditions, then powerful feminist critiques exposing biases, and then comes Carol Gilligan, really bringing the ethics of care into the spotlight. How did her work challenge things?
Gilligan was hugely influential. Her work directly took on Lawrence Kohlberg's stages of moral development, which were, frankly, the standard model.
Based mostly on boys, right?
Primarily, yes. And Kohlberg suggested the highest moral reasoning involved abstract justice principles. Gilligan said, wait a minute. She argued his framework privileged this ethics of justice and basically missed or undervalued a distinct ethics of care she saw much more often in how women reasoned morally.
So not less moral, but different, using a different compass.
Exactly. A different moral voice, she called it. One rooted in women's experiences of interconnection, prioritizing relationships, responsibilities, specific needs, nurturance.
So for women, maybe the dilemma wasn't just what's the rule, but how do I maintain these connections and respond to people's needs?
That was the core idea, and this even led to talk about differentiated citizenship.
It sounds complicated.
It just means maybe rights and duties shouldn't be identical for everyone, but should consider gender and perceived natural roles, which of course directly challenged the equal, universal citizenship idea central to justice theories.
It's fascinating how Gilligan's different voice connects back to, well, centuries of thinking about women and morality. What did those earlier historical views look like?
Oh, absolutely. It didn't come out of nowhere. If you go back to the 17th century, women's morality was often strictly tied to chastity, to domestic virtue. They were often seen as lacking the capacity for improvement of mind, serious intellectual stuff.
Because their worth was tied to purity.
Largely, yes. Then you get Mary Wollstonecraft in the late 18th century powerfully arguing for women's equal moral and rational rights, demanding education. But even so, that societal focus on women's virtue as something distinct persisted.
And later.
Even in the 19th century, with figures like J.S. Mill and Harriet Taylor Mill arguing against women's subjugation, some movements, maybe unintentionally, ended up reinforcing ideas of female superiority based on supposedly innate qualities.
Like gentleness, love, spirituality being inherently female.
Exactly, trying to elevate women, but sometimes by locking them into these essentialist boxes. Certain virtues were seen as just part of being female.
So even advocates could fall back on essentialism. What's the modern take on that? Why is pushing back against essentialism so important now?
It's absolutely vital. The modern rebuttal is clear. Qualities like spirituality, empathy, gentleness, they aren't exclusive to any gender. Men seek spirituality. Men experience deep empathy. Attributing traits inherently to one gender is limiting. It perpetuates stereotypes.
It ignores the full spectrum of human experience in everyone.
Precisely. It traps us. We need to recognize shared human capacities.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
So, where does this leave us? Those early feminist theories, Gilligan, Sixus, Irigaray, McKinnon, groundbreaking stuff. But they face criticism too, right? For being maybe essentialist, Eurocentric, idealistic.
Yes, that critique came from diverse feminist groups, transgender feminists, black feminists, Islamic feminists, non-white feminists generally. The concern was, how do we affirm difference, which is crucial, without falling back into rigid categories that say all women are X or all men are Y.
Avoiding new stereotypes, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Essentialism means believing certain traits are just inherent, fixed qualities of a group. While the early work was vital for challenging male norms, some later critics felt it risked creating its own essentialist traps or didn't fully capture the huge diversity within women's experiences globally.
So the goal shifted away from defining woman
Towards describing the possibilities of being in all their multiplicity. This leads into the second generation of sexual difference theory. Thinkers like Rosie Braidotti, Elizabeth Grosz.
What was their approach?
They wanted to keep sexual difference as a foundational idea, but without filling it with predetermined, normative, or essential content. Braidotti, for instance, asked a fascinating question. Can we think of other, not as other than the norm, but as positively other entities?
Positively other. What does that mean in practice?
It means seeing difference not as a lack or something defined only in opposition to a dominant group, but as a rich, valuable, self-defined way of being in its own right.
Okay, so valuing difference for itself.
Yes. Recovering the feminine, generating autonomous imagery, but without prescribing what it must be. Drusilla Cortnell's formal theory also pushes this, affirming the feminine symbolically, but resisting giving it fixed content, embracing multiplicity.
Building an inclusive foundation without dictating the specifics of identity.
That's the aim, recognizing difference as strength, not definition. It's a really profound shift.
It is. But how does this sophisticated view of difference mesh with those universal principles we started with? Can you really incorporate otherness and multiplicity into Kantian ethics or social contracts? Doesn't it challenge the whole idea of universalism?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The potential lies in reimagining universalism. Maybe we can use Kantian ideas or social contractualism like Rawls's veil of ignorance, but only if this otherness, this multiplicity women, trans people, diverse global views are truly baked in from the very start.
So, not added on later, but part of the initial design.
Exactly. It challenges the often unstated assumption that there's a single default human perspective from which these theories were built.
So it's less about throwing out universal principles and more about radically redesigning the table where they're decided, making sure everyone is truly there.
You got it. Think about international relations, the shift towards a multipolar world. No single superpower dictates everything. Multiple centers influence the narrative.
Yeah.
A truly inclusive universalism would be like that. It wouldn't assume one correct human experience defines morality for everyone. It would be built from the ground up, valuing all perspectives.
And acknowledging difference matters.
Absolutely. Post-colonial thinkers like Spivak really hammer this home. You can't just impose one system everywhere without nuance. Differences matter profoundly.
Okay, so a universalism that's genuinely universal because it embraces difference, this feels like it leads right into a global imperative of care. If we take this seriously, what does it mean for policy, for how nations interact?
This is where philosophy really needs to connect with policy. And ethics of care is, I think, vital for international relations. Look at conflicts Russia-Ukraine, potential flashpoints like China-Taiwan, who suffers most.
Women and children, disproportionately.
Exactly. Traditional justice might focus on state rights, sovereignty, abstract principles. But integrating care means prioritizing the well-being of actual people, especially the vulnerable. It means diplomacy focused on minimizing harm, on human impact.
A different lens for foreign policy.
A much-needed one. And there's a strong case that feminist philosophers, especially maybe the French feminists, are underappreciated here. Their insights on care, on relationality, they're not just academic, they're crucial for global progress, for more humane interactions.
That's a powerful point.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier that knowledge isn't essentialist, it can be borrowed. How does that fit in?
It's critical. Ideas aren't owned by one group. Dalit feminists in India drawing inspiration from French feminists, adapting theories to their context. Susan Muller-Oken taking Rawls's contractualism and deliberately expanding it to include women's lives and the family structure.
So ideas travel, adapt, get richer.
Precisely. It shows we can build on each other's insights across cultures, across different struggles, to create something more robust and inclusive.
So if we can borrow knowledge, if care is globally vital, what kind of future system are we aiming for? Something that finally bridges justice and care.
I think the direction is towards androgynous, non-essentialist systems. That means pushing for an ethics of care to become a truly universal principle, influencing policy everywhere.
Androgynous. What does that mean in this context?
Thinkers like Judith Butler or Alison Jagger explore this. It's about systems where values and qualities aren't rigidly assigned to genders, where men, women, all genders are seen as capable of the full range of human traits.
Breaking free from men are rational, women are caring.
Exactly. A woman can be assertive or even aggressive. A man can be nurturing and peace-oriented. We move beyond those limiting boxes. It's about recognizing the whole person.
So, reconnecting logic and emotion, seeing them as human capacities, not gendered ones.
Precisely. Advocating for principles and virtues that are beyond genders, shared by all. And history shows this is possible, right? Men led reforms against practices like sati or child marriage in India, demonstrating both reason and compassion.
A shared human potential.
Yes. So the call really is for philosophers, policymakers, activists, all of us to work together to embed these shared virtues, justice and care, reason and emotion, into our structures, our policies, to actively prevent exploitation, violence, war.
A truly collaborative path forward.
Towards a more humane, a more equitable world. That's the hope.
We've covered so much ground, from those seemingly rigid universal principles of traditional justice, through the absolutely vital, often sidelined insights of the ethics of care.
And landing on this potential for integration, weaving them together.
Right. Not choosing one over the other, but acknowledging both our rights and our responsibilities to each other, our deep interconnectedness.
It's a more complete picture of human morality, perhaps.
And as we've said, this isn't just abstract stuff. Understanding these different frameworks helps you navigate your own ethics, look at global issues with more nuance.
And maybe challenge that black and white thinking we fall into.
Definitely. It helps to demand systems that genuinely serve everyone, not just a select few based on old bias assumptions.
It's about asking those critical questions.
So here's a thought to leave you with. Considering this push for universal principles that truly embrace multiplicity and for a global ethics of care, how might you start to identify and maybe challenge essentialist thinking, those limiting assumptions about gender or other groups in your own communities, maybe even within your own mind, to help foster a more inclusive and genuinely peaceful world?